Okay, today's question or request is, please provide daily practice or practices for manifesting material abundance. Please provide daily practices for manifesting material abundance. Okay, let's do it. My dog thinks I'm talking to him. He's over there. Okay. Right, so, we're all good. Greetings and thank you for the question. Please provide daily practices for material abundance. Fundamental to manifesting material abundance is establishing a vibratory quality which forms the geometry on which your material desires will manifest. Your higher self is an infinite being, and it is in full awareness of its infinity and its capacity to manifest desires without limitation. However, when your higher self is streaming into the body and then broadcast into your reality as presence, as the vibration forming the geometry on which your reality manifests, it is filtered and there is distortion, and particularly for you, Murray, this quality of infinite capacity to manifest desires is filtered out. The mind is overlaying a vibratory quality based on beliefs which are the result of the accumulative history that you recall. And so it holds a belief which is erroneous, and that is that your material abundance is what it is right now, that your capacity to manifest is what you enjoy right now. And we know from a relative sense your material abundance is deprived. It is somewhat less than average. So to manifest more in harmony with your capacity and from the higher self of this infinite being with the infinite capacity to manifest desires, which is the true you. This is you. You are not the mind and the beliefs of the mind. The mind is a tool which, when used correctly, is subjugated as servant to the higher self. And it is silent except when called upon to perform a function. However, the predominant state on your planet is that the mind has been elevated in reverence beyond its intended use, such that you become identified with the mind, believing that you are the mind, you are the body, you are the personality, and the higher self exists in a state of complete unawareness from the perspective of the mind. The mind is unaware that the higher self exists, even though you are the higher self. And the mind is just an organic artificial intelligence inherent to the conduit, which is just a temporary vehicle, such that you can integrate into physical reality to have a physical experience temporarily. And so because there is this misuse of the apparatus, then the true essence of self, the true vibratory nature of self, is distorted and filtered. And those distortions and filtrations are based on the belief systems of the mind. The belief systems of the mind primarily will be the result of the historical experiences. So, the way to be more reflective in the space of your physical reality of the highest self qualities is to be more self-perceiving as the higher self, and to be less perceiving as the mind. Because you are not the mind, you are the higher self, and the mind is nothing but an intellect, a logistical tool to facilitate the higher self. So when you are able to silence the mind and remove its authority so it becomes subjugated to the higher self, then it becomes an allowing. And so this quality of abundance is not something that you need to create, because it is an inherent quality of the higher self. Fundamental, inherent, completely integrated into the higher self is abundance. It is not something that needs to be nurtured. It is not something that needs to be learned, because it is you. You are the higher self, and as such you are abundance. And so for this vibratory quality to be transferred into the material world which you manifest, you do not need to create the ability to be creative, create the ability to manifest, but instead allow it to be present. And so the way that you allow it to be present is by silencing the mind and silencing the beliefs of the mind, which erroneously create the experience of lacking material abundance. So these are the practices that we will suggest to you. The first practice is to spend time in meditation regularly, and during your meditation to contemplate your infinite, contemplate your boundless capacities, and appreciate that you are not the mind, the body, personality, but you are instead the higher self, the infinite being, the eternally mortal individuation of the love of the one. And as you become more familiar with this aspect of self, where you are aware that you exist, and yet there is no internal dialogue, there is no mind activity. You sense that you are, and yet there is no presence of mind. This is the higher self. And when you are in a contemplative state, like we are describing, be aware of your infinite capacities. Understand that you are an infinite being, a fifth-dimensional energetic, and in a sense, compared to the physical being, you are a god with the capacities to create, as you would expect, a God can. So this is the first part that we would suggest that you do regularly. The next step that we recommend is that you diminish the mind beliefs which erroneously hold an misunderstanding which is reflected back to you in the reality you experience. And that misunderstanding is that you are a being lacking capacity to create material wealth. If you look closely, you'll see the trick of the mind is that the mind makes it perceptibly true through the senses that non-abundance is a possibility because you don't have what we considered material abundance. And so the mind has a belief that this is possible, and as such you are creating a geometry which is manifesting a reality congruent with that belief. But of course, it is still abundance. It is just a different form of abundance. So you have an abundance of lack. You have an abundance of the absence of material wealth. So it is still abundance. Because as an infinite being, you have capacities of abundance only. You do not have capacities of lack. Whatever it is that you wish to create, you will create it in abundance. Because that is the natural way of an infinite being. A being which is infinite and exists in a matrix of infinite potential can create no other way than abundantly. And so when there is a lack, then that lack is an abundance of the absence of material wealth. So this belief that you are holding within the mind that you are lacking is erroneous. Instead, what it is, it's a label. It's a label that your mind has placed on the energetic feed which is emanating from you, downloading real-time streaming from the higher self. And so you are downloading real-time streaming from the higher self abundance. This is part of the vibratory quality that you emanate. And your mind has erroneously placed a label on that quality through its belief, and that label is a lack of material desires. And so through this filter you are still creating abundantly, but you are creating an abundance of this lack. You are creating an abundance of this belief, reflective of that belief. When you identify with the mind, you are going to filter all of the flow through the beliefs of the mind. And so you are going to create manifestations which will have erroneous qualities based on the erroneous beliefs of the mind. So when you are fully aware that you are the higher self, which has been established through this first practice we give you, then when we look at the mind, and we pull our identity out of the mind and we look at it forensically, we look at it in an analytical way, we can determine that there are beliefs held by the mind which are erroneous by looking at the characteristics of the manifest reality in which you exist. If it is in some way imperfect, and of course there is no such thing as imperfection, it is all perfect, because the imperfection is really perfection, because it is showing you exactly who you are being through the beliefs that you hold. And so it's an essential feedback mechanism such that you can become more fully realized, know thyself more fully as the higher self in the physical field, because this is the purpose. So if you are not being fully present as the higher self, because you are holding beliefs of the mind which are erroneous, then you need the feedback. You require the feedback from your reality to point this out to you, that you are not being fully realized, that you are being identified with the mind and not fully allowing of the true essence of who you are, the higher self, to streamload and emanate authentically, purely, instantaneously as presence. And so it is perfection. The reality you live, even if it appears to contain things that you don't desire, it is perfection. Because if it did not reflect this back to you, you would not be able to calibrate yourself such that you allow more of the true essence of self to flow. So even though it appears to be imperfect, it is perfect. It's a perfect reflection such that you can further evolve, further know thyself, and more masterfully be the higher self in the physical experience. So, using that understanding and looking about your world and seeing that you are holding erroneous beliefs which are filtering and distorting your abundant quality such that you are creating abundance of something that you don't desire. So we want to establish this, that there is a belief which is being held by the mind, because it can only be a belief of the mind, because the higher self does not have beliefs, but does not have beliefs, but has knowing. It is understanding which is fully integrated into the being. It is not a layered energetic, a layered filter over the energy of the being. It is something which is fully integrated into the being as knowing. And so the higher self knows it is abundance. And yet the mind, not knowing, because it does not have the full integration into the infinite and complete wisdom of the higher self, so it makes assumptions and it formulates ideas based on the information it has available and creates beliefs from them. And those beliefs very often are going to be erroneous and are going to be not a reflection of the true vibratory nature inherent to the true essence of who you are, the fifth dimensional, infinite higher self. And so these beliefs, you can spend time to discover what these beliefs are specifically, but it's not essential. You don't need to know the precise beliefs you hold, which are creating the distortion and filtering the true essence of who you are, such that it converts the qualities to something else. Being aware that that is happening, being aware that you are holding beliefs, clearly you are. You're holding beliefs which are distorting the inherent qualities of the higher self, which is an infinite, perfect, energetic being. And so the qualities of the higher self are still present, but they're present in a way which has been distorted. If you accept this is what is occurring, then you can make the decision to disidentify with that. You do not need to know specifically what the belief is, or specifically how the belief was formed, although this is useful to understand. But to keep this process simple, just be aware that you are holding a belief which is erroneous, which is distorting the emanation. And so, with this understanding, release it. Release it with complete trust and faith that the level of understanding where you truly reside, which is the higher self, there is awareness of what that is. There is understanding of what that belief is, how it originated, how it has formed over the years, how it has become what it is. From the higher self perspective, this is fully within your awareness. It's not even remotely difficult for the higher self to perceive and understand what that is. And so, being the higher self, the perspective of the higher self, looking at the mind like it is a tool, make the decision to disidentify with that, to release it, to let it go. Because you are in a state of understanding that it is erroneous, that it is a falsity, that it is the mind overreaching its authority. Because the mind is a tool which is servant to the higher self. Its rightful place is as subjugated servant to the infinite higher self. It is just a part of the apparatus. It's a tool. So to elevate it above higher self in reverence is a misuse. So release, let it go. And then when you are perceiving from the perspective of the higher self, examining the mind, manipulate the mind, or direct the mind, form the mind, shape the mind to hold a belief which is congruent and perfectly calibrated with the true nature of the higher self, which is that you are an infinite being with an infinite capacity to manifest material desires. This is the truth. This is the reality of who you are. And so as the master of the mind, who has full control of the mind and understands that the mind is a servant, it is a programmable artificial intelligence inherent to the conduit, to the vehicle which you temporarily use for this temporary lifetime. And so install into this apparatus, into the programmable operating system, this belief, this new belief, this true belief that you are an infinite being with an infinite capacity to manifest your material desires. Establish that as the new belief, having released the old belief which was manifesting an abundance of that which you don't desire. And then going forward, whenever you have moments where you feel concern over your materiality, over your future capacity to meet financial commitments and so on, where normally you would hold a sense of mild dread, imperceptible dread, significant dread, in those moments, recognize that this is the stimulation of an old erroneous belief, that there are still some remnants of it, and that once again it's the mind trying to elevate itself in reverence such that it becomes the master and the higher self is silenced. Don't allow this to happen. When you begin to have these sensations, shift to the higher self and remind yourself that you are the infinite being with an infinite capacity to manifest your material desires, and that these feelings you're having of dread are just erroneous. Release them, and then magnify the potency of this belief that you are the infinite being with infinite capacity to manifest your material desires. Implant that, fully integrate that belief into the mind, such that the mind has become reprogrammed and begins to filter the download real-time streaming of the higher self through that lens, through that belief lens. And that belief lens is fully translucent, because that is highly congruent with the truth of who you are. And so in a sense, it is no longer being an opaque lens which is distorting the energy such that you create an abundance of lack, but instead it's more like a window has been opened. And so the download streaming is allowed to emanate as presence, unadulterated, not distorted, unfiltered. And the abundant quality can then manifest as your desires rather than as something you don't desire, because the abundance is still going to be present, but in what form? If you can allow this to occur, then the form it shall be in is a form which is more in line with that which you desire. So, now we need to determine what is it that you desire. You must form some type of imagery, some type of conceptualization of that which it is you desire, so that you are forming the geometry. Because underlying your reality is a geometry. You are creating a geometry in an energetic sense. So you could say there is a layer between the higher self and the physical reality which you are creating. There is a layer, like a template layer. And that template layer is the geometry on which your physical reality is manifesting. And so you are creating the geometry in real time, all the time. And so when you wish to manifest a particular type of material abundance, it is actually more accurate to, instead of trying to manifest the car or manifest the dollars in your bank, it actually makes more sense and is more effective and will create a more accurate manifestation of that which you desire if you concentrate more on manifesting the geometry, creating the geometry underlying the physical reality, because the physical reality will form a congruent structure to the geometry. It will manifest according to the geometry. And so have a clear understanding of what it is that you desire. What are the material desires that you have? Be very clear and succinct about what that is. And then, when you imagine it in a way where you are imagining an underlying geometry. You are creating a geometric field which is representative of the material wealth that you desire. And create this geometry very, very succinctly, very, very clearly, such that the lines and the corners and the edges are very well defined. There is not fuzziness. There is just a very clear geometry. Now, it's not important that you understand what this geometry looks like, that you have to hold it in your mind and see it clearly exactly what it is. It's the concept that's important. So conceptually, form the geometry. Know that you are forming the geometry. And hold this conceptualization and understanding, an intuitive knowing that this geometry I'm holding now is congruent to the manifestations of my material desires, which is going to assemble itself. Your material world will assemble itself on the geometry you create. And then release it. If you hold this geometry too long, it will begin to distort and change quality. Because if you hold your focus on the geometry too long, what begins to occur is a transformation from the concept of this material manifestation to the concept of the absence of this material manifestation. The geometry doesn't have to be maintained consciously non-stop. Instead, hold the geometry and then implant the geometry into the solar plexus. And so the emanation is going through the lens, and in that lens is in a way etched the geometry. And so the manifestation will be reflective of this etching in the lens of the solar plexus. In a way, it will be holographic. And so the infinitely small, you have etched the geometry into the lens through which you emanate. At the window between the physical world and the energetic world. And passing through this lens will be the outline of the geometry which you have created through conscious contemplation of that which you desire, and then the purposeful creation of that geometric map. And then once you have embedded that into the lens, you can release it, you can let it go. And the lens, if you have told it, if you have informed the mechanism to hold that etching, to maintain that pattern, that blueprint, then it shall do it. As long as you can continue to keep the mind silent of these erroneous beliefs. And then occasionally return to this lens and reinforce the geometry. Go back there and re-examine and refocus the geometry which you created, the blueprint you created, consistently. And when we say consistently, we mean consistently return, yes, but also be consistent in the geometry that you create, such that it's not shifting so much that the reality is having a longer path to the manifestation of that which you desire. So that is quite a bit that we have given you, so we will leave it at that. You have your practice. We suggest you watch this over several times such that you can understand. We would like you to manifest as the Master manifests, and that is by being the higher self that has awareness of all layers of your reality, including the geometric layer, such that you can become an architect within the geometric layer, creating the blueprint which you then etch into the lens through which you emanate, such that you are broadcasting this geometric pattern, this geometric map, which is a map of the material abundance you wish to enjoy and all else which you wish to enjoy in your physical reality, into the physical reality. And so the geometric map is laid down, and then the structures of this design are then built on it through the manifestation process. The physical reality will build itself on the geometric map, which you are broadcasting from the emanation of the higher self passing through the lens. So this is very exciting for us to give you this information, because this is leading edge information. This is a very powerful and masterful way to create your reality. And we are bringing this to you because you are ready to be aware of it, you're ready to implement it. Otherwise, it would not have come through in this channeling session, because it is your wisdom drawn to you through your own capacities and readiness to hear it, integrate it, implement it. Thank you, we love you, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.